Welcome back. I got an exciting update. So let's go to Google Earth. I've been talking about large igneous provinces recently and their relationship to the Earth's expansion process. So a quick description of what we're going to go through is the process it's related to is undercurrents that flowed at one time below the crust of the Earth that are mapped, that I've mapped in my Earth's undercurrents video, for instance, and detailed in all of my underground science videos, like across time with evidence from papers, technical papers. We're gonna go to Ecuador, but real quick, the general concept is that a current flowed out from the mantle in this location in Pakistan and went in all directions under the crust and then collided at certain places. And in those locations, the interaction of the colliding currents led to the single landmass of the continental crust to begin to break apart by forming a particularly mounds of material of basaltic nature that have come to be mechanisms that push the crust apart, and then the crust physically broke in the process to become the continents that we see today, and then they spaced apart so that the oceanic plateaus, which we see like all these, like, so I've been looking at Ontong Java, Manihiki down here, Hikarangi. I was just looking at Shatsky Rise. I'm stoked to talk about that probably in the next video. Over here, some of my recent videos are along the western boundary of Australia with relationship to undercurrents and the things I've mapped. But yesterday I was like, what do I want to look into? And I started just I was like, maybe I could find some videos on YouTube. So I typed in geology Mexico lecture, trying to find like a geologist presenting a lecture where they have slides and talk about something. And then I found a couple things, but I didn't watch them. I ended up at some point searching for a geology lecture Ecuador, and I found a couple which I did watch, which is really the reason I did Ecuador is because this location here is where it flowed out from, but then it ended up colliding right here, so I call that the mantle puncture hole, the first one, which is in Pakistan. This swirl, this is like it's closing off by forming a mound there that is swirling. But in the process, it punctured the mantle again, is what I interpreted for a while, and that's generally what I think happened here, is the mantle got punctured again, a second time, at this location. So that's why I chose Ecuador. This is Ecuador here. So Ecuador, I guess let's just pull up the boundaries. Ecuador. Here's the secondary mantle puncture hole location. And I started watching videos on it and found some things of interest, but we're not even going to really talk about the videos because I went to Google Scholar and typed in geology Ecuador. And I came across some things that I'm going to go through in this video, so that's what we're going to do. I just started posting them, researching Ecuador, more connections being made. So the first paper I came across says coastal Ecuador is made up of an oceanic igneous basement, which immediately caught my attention because that means it's made up of a large igneous province, basically. One of these types of things. These mounds out in the ocean, like Shatsky Rise, like Ontong Java Plateau, like Exmouth Plateau, like this one, which I was looking into a little bit today, but I'll probably get to that at some point, but not yet. So as soon as I saw that, I was like, oh. So it ended up being, like, in short, just a quick recap of what I am realizing from it is this region, and up here, is all accreted terrain, kind of like western United States and North America, really, is newly formed. So the Earth's expansion process began 541 million years radiometric dating. That's kind of where I interpret it to be, at least. Possibly a little sooner, but I'm pretty sure right then. That's kind of where the evidence is pointing me to. And this is actually when the Earth flooded, was from the puncturing of the mantle leading to a global flood. When all the waters of the Earth were released, added to those that were already present, really. And to such a degree that they flooded the entire surface of the continents and flowed with vigor throughout the world and shaped the world. I've mapped current flows. See my recent video, like these. For instance, this one are some current flows, large scale, obviously. There's another eddy of this nature up here, centered on the Hudson Bay. We can go to Europe and look at this one. For instance, like this, where current flow came off of North America, out of the Hudson Bay, really, between Greenland and Canada, and went south along the eastern boundary of North America, but it also went north and east, so just east pretty much, north of the Azores Plateau. So one current went this way, one current went this way, and then current coming off of here went below it and squeezed the Azores Plateau region into being, pretty much. But the current going this way interacted with current coming across from Asia, across this way, some of which ran into the Himalayas and participated in their formation, but some of which went to the west of the Himalayas. Some went along this path, basically, which is what these are. And then the current coming through the Mediterranean, which etched the Mediterranean, went below it here, where a eddy formed around Greece. And then some of it went across over into Africa, where it joined other currents. So there's a global flood being caused by this, and the radiometric dating of 541 million years is not actually when it happened. That's just what, based on current decay rates, that it points to have been, but it actually doesn't account for details, and it was much more recent, like when the global flood happened, that ancestral narratives describe across the world. And what they don't really mention is that the same process was happening when the Earth was expanding, and in expanding, it was forming these oceanic plateaus. Like this one was forming over here with relationship to the Gulf of Mexico. Maybe I can find it. Not sure where I put it. Not sure where I put it. Here we go. Like this. So Ontong Java's here, so maybe if we go here, we can see it a little better. Where I didn't just chop it off. This one I just chopped it off like it didn't matter. Or just more so to see, but I also understood to add it, so like it's seems to have some kind of relationship, like a negative positive with the Gulf of Mexico. But here's Ecuador. So apparently, the Ontong Java Plateau, this is of relevance. It's called the Ontong Java Nui hypothesis, that Ontong Java Plateau formed with the Manihiki Plateau, which formed with the Hikarangi Plateau, all as one unit, basically. And then they broke apart and moved apart by what in plate tectonics would be called the result of plate tectonics, but is actually from the Earth's expansion process. So those are forming all generally in that area here in this region, and then some of it's being shoved down there with New Zealand, while other portion is being put over that way, and then Ontong Java just kind of stays there with respect to Australia. And this opens up in the meantime, like the Caribbean Sea isn't open yet. Okay. So, back to this. Ocean. So that's what, as soon as I saw this, I was like, interested. Oceanic igneous basement overlain by Upper Cretaceous to Lower Paleocene 98 to 60. It's 98 to 60, so when the Earth expanded, it basically it built up pressure from 541 million to 65 million, with probably something of significance of like a intermediary step of the Earth expansion, where it expanded somewhat at the Permian boundary, Permian Triassic, where the largest extinction is considered to have occurred relating to this process. But then it didn't really expand fully until 66 million, where see all my events of the KT boundary related videos. I have a playlist on that. So the fact that it's 98 to 60, it crosses that time frame, really points to some relationship to the KT boundary. Okay, so the igneous basement, known as how to pronounce I don't know this one.
pronouncenames.com.
Pinon formation. The Pinon formation, which is locally dated to 123 million, according to this paper. I've definitely found other information. This, if we go back to my Twitter here, well, this is my Twitter, but click this. This is from 1999 from Renaud et al. Apparently 62 authors even. Well, and we can click this real quick. So from this paper, oceanic plateau and island arcs of southwestern Ecuador, they are placed in the geodynamic evolution of northwest South America, northwestern. And then I just copied the abstract there. Oops. So then I kept reading. The rocks of the Pinon Formation are geochemically similar to the oceanic plateau tholiites from Nauru and Ontong Java plateaus. Nauru is over here, like like that somewhere. Nauru Oceanic Plateau. It's basically in the region of Ontong Java Plateau. Maybe we can even go to Scholar. Nauru Plateau. Geology. Something of this nature. And find... Oh, maybe it's the basin? Either way, that region... I don't want to get too caught up. Apparently it's a plateau too. There's a plateau there, but it's generally here. Let's see where Nauru is. It might be this arm. Somewhere in that region then. I'm not sure what the exact boundaries of this is versus Ontong Java, but basically when I see Ontong Java Nui, Ontong Java Nui hypothesis, it also includes this one, and this one, and this one. So this points to, it also includes the Pignon Formation, because geochemically similar to, and to the Upper Cretaceous 92 to 88 Caribbean Oceanic Plateau lavas, which are what's here is a large igneous province of the Caribbean Plateau. So we got all these similarities. The basement of coastal Ecuador is interpreted as a accreted fragment of an over-thickened and buoyant oceanic plateau. So fragment. They interpret it to be an accreted, like shoved on there, kind of like Silesia, if you've seen some of my other videos, or if you follow Nick Zentner's channel, he talks about Silesia a lot. Like that, accreted fragment of an over-thickened and buoyant oceanic plateau. So a portion, it seems, of Ontong Java, Manihiki, Nauru, Hikarangi plateaus, which are all one, a portion of it is found in Ecuador, actually composing a portion of this region here as the Pignon Formation. So that got my attention very quickly, this one paper, and then as you can see I just kept looking. So then the next one, which is from Hotchmuth and Gull, says collision of the Manihiki Plateau fragments to accretional margins of northern Andes and Antarctic Peninsula. So this is also on the Antarctic Peninsula, which I haven't really looked into. So a piece of this, which if we click this, which I'll link this Twitter thread, a piece of this is considered to be, and this portion east. So if we go up here, Ontong Java Nui, which has northeast fragment, east fragment. The northeast fragment is considered to have, according to plate tectonics, moved all the way across here and collided with South America by the motion of the Farallon plate. Not the case because it's in a plate tectonic framework. The reality is that the Earth expanded. It's just the reality of the situation. So really, it was much more like this. So it was like, it was right there to begin with. Largely, maybe it was shoved on there somewhat. Okay, so let's go back here though. The Manihiki Plateau, a large igneous province, was emplaced in the early Cretaceous as a single plateau together with the Ontong Java Plateau and the Hikarangi Plateau. So they're basically describing the Ontong Java Nui hypothesis of these three being one at one time. Additional to the present Manihiki Plateau, fragments to its northeast and east have been formed. And they say, by tracing these fragments, we report a Paleocene collision of the northeastern Manihiki Plateau fragment, which is the Pinon Formation, with the northern South American craton. The northern Andes exhibit multiple terrains of large igneous province origin, which we'll get into some others. We infer, based on geophysical, petrological, and geochemical data, that the Pinon Formation consists of crustal units of the former Manihiki Plateau. So basically, like, imagine Ontong Java Plateau is connected to Manihiki Plateau, which is connected to Pinon Formation, and that breaks off there. The Manihiki Plateau breaks off of the Ontong Java Plateau, possibly in the process because it's connected, like bonded to South America, so it breaks from the Ontong Java Plateau, but the Ontong Java Plateau region is sufficiently separated energetically from South America that the connection of this Pinon Formation doesn't it allows for the separation of Manihiki from the Ontong Java Plateau. It's kind of my initial interpretation of what might be happening. Okay, so the next thing, plate tectonics would suggest this fragment of the Manihiki Plateau broke off from basically proximal to Papua New Guinea. So it broke off like over here where the Manihiki Plateau is with Ontong Java Plateau. So Ontong Java Plateau is here. Manihiki is connected to it. Hikarangi is connected to it. And then the plates move the Manihiki over here, but then they move a fragment of it all the way over here and collide it over here. But the reality is this is another proof that the Earth expanded and the entire Ontong Java Nui complex was adjacent to Ecuador. That this segment of the Pinon Formation is a component of Ecuador points to the one-time proximity of the Ontong Java Nui complex, rather than this much more coincidental and far distance traveling of the Pinon Formation to collide. From the first paper, so from this paper, I kept looking at some stuff and I noticed this. Renaud et al., the Pinon Formation underlying western Ecuador terrains, point of origin, considered to be the result of a hotspot. So they plate tectonics to explain large igneous provinces just says the lower mantle has a mantle plume that then has a mantle head come up that then basically erupts a large igneous province onto the crust to explain these. But then there's I think thousands of seamounts to explain, certainly hundreds. So there need to be mantle plumes for them all, where what I'm saying is undercurrents flow below the crust, collide, and at certain pressure points based on the overall currents below the crust, and produce large igneous provinces, and then cause the Earth to expand, but these undercurrents are still flowing. So they produce more systems, sometimes seamounts, sometimes other large igneous provinces, in a fluid way that's not related to the lower mantle, really, but to a puncture hole in Pakistan where currents flowed out in all directions. Okay, so they say may have been located closer to the Ecuadorian margin. So to read it, the presence of Precambrian island arc products, these ones, indicates that the Pinon Formation has constituted the upper plate of an intra-oceanic subduction system in a plate tectonic framework, but the point is, and has not been transported passively by the oceanic plate during the whole 123 to 80 million year time span. Therefore, the hotspot responsible for the generation of the Pinon Formation may have been located closer to the Ecuadorian margin, which plate tectonics says that basically an ocean of this size existed, that these were this separated, but Earth expansion puts all the continents back together. The Pacific is the Pacific because that's where the focal point of all the energy came together and then exploded outward energy to push continents apart, where like the Atlantic, it's not the focal point, it's more like a balance point, which is why there's the Ring of Fire, because it's where like an explosive expansion of the Earth happened in a fractal way, like a fractal supernova of the planet, seen from a different angle, basically. Okay, so let's keep going. And I just said this further corroborates Earth expansion mechanics that they're saying. It seems to have may have been located closer to the Ecuadorian margin where this formed, which doesn't really make sense if it was part of the Ontong Java Plateau, Ontong Java Nui complex, unless the Ontong Java Nui complex also was over there and then the ocean separated it as it formed, not just as plates moved, but as it physically opened, like the Ontong Java Nui complex, or Ontong Java Plateau, was more connected to Australia. So when Australia and the Americas separated, the Ontong Java Nui rode with Australia away, while the Pinon Formation did not. But they were once together, but then it rode away, like my fingernail rode away from my other fingernail. When they were once together, physically conjoined. I can't do that with my fingernails, but then I said terrains accreted onto, let me just click this, onto western Ecuador and Colombia were of Cretaceous age, so these just show the age, approaching the Cretaceous Paleogene boundary, but did not form afterwards. Although I've seen there's layers deposited afterwards, the formation of these things does not, this one kind of goes to the KT boundary and a little past it, but generally speaking, they're approaching the KT boundary. This is when a lot of things going on in the British Columbia region with regard to Baja, BC. And again, in Nick Zender's channel, he talks about that a lot. This is when a lot of that stuff's going on. So, like, there's a connection where down here there's stuff going on, and up there there's stuff going on. So let's continue. Then I took a picture of this. Proposed by Hockmuth and Gao, the second paper above, the one I already looked at. We already looked at this a little bit. Northeast segment of Ontong Java Nui proposed to have been carried across from it to collide with South America with the eastern segment brought to Antarctica. So this is just kind of what they're thinking. Like, well, something must have brought it across because it's in a plate tectonics framework, so something must have done it. So it must have been the Farallon plate because that's where we see it now. So it must have been the Farallon plate, and just reconstructing an interpretation, but not necessarily a valid one. No offense to anyone. The problem is everyone's work is in the framework of plate tectonics. If they were analyzing this with the Earth expansion as a actual like alternative, it almost needs to be necessary, like to propose new research, like new data, and have it only be analyzed in the context of one model. There's no like weighing going on. Imagine a scale, like one of those scales that's on a standing justice, like this, like one of these. And then they put, everything is put on the plate tectonic side, and nothing is put on the Earth expansion side, because the side's not even like ever has put anything put on it, but it's still a side that exists to the possible to like weigh the things. It will look like this side's heavier, when the reality is like all this stuff on the plate tectonic side can be put on the Earth expansion side, and then suddenly it goes the other way, where the evidence shows the true answer of geologically to be an Earth expansion model. So let's check out this next one. The proposed collision dates, I don't know if this fully makes sense in terms of like if it's the most potent argument, let's say. The proposed collision date of this fragment post-dates formation atop it, strongly suggestive that this analysis based in plate tectonics is incapable of actually explaining what occurred, because the Earth expanded and the regions were closer when the fragment broke away. So what I'm really saying is, imagine this piece of fragment on the Farallon plate is moving towards South America, according to plate tectonics interpretations, and somehow it is having formations, layers, and depositions atop it that don't really make sense. Like, there's things atop it that require it being part of a continent, is what I would say. Like, it has to have already been connected and conjoined to the continent for depositions of these sedimentary layers that follow on top of the large igneous province to actually make sense. If it's out in the ocean still, moving towards, but not yet collided with Ecuador region of South America, then it shouldn't be forming these layers. That's kind of what I'm saying. Whether or not that's the best argument, I'm not completely sure, but I feel just like it doesn't really make sense. So down here, it arrived at the subduction trench at today's northern Andes of Ecuador and Colombia during the late Paleocene, early Eocene, 60 to 55 million years. Mind you, there's things atop it that predate that. Let's keep going. Plate tectonics proclaims there to be a lack of corresponding magnetic anomaly. So this is just another evidence against plate tectonics. is that plate tectonics reconstructions of the Pacific Ocean for the time frame of the Cretaceous to the Paleocene suffer from large uncertainties because of lacking, meaning they don't exist, corresponding magnetic stretching anomalies. So, like, there's nothing in the magnetic anomalies showing this motion. So it basically needs to be written off as something happened to hide it, and so be it. Like, it is what it is. Like, the plates moved and brought this there because it's there. We don't know why there's a lacking of corresponding magnetic spreading anomalies. There just is. And we're going to maintain plate tectonics because we're not considering Earth expansion. But the lack of the data kind of points to that the interpretation is in an invalid framework, where Earth expansion doesn't have this problem because it basically was there the whole time, and then the Earth expanded. Not the whole time, but when it formed generally at the Ecuadorian margin, and then became part of Ecuador as like a basement rock. And so it wouldn't have these magnetic spreading anomalies. So the lack of them is not really an issue in an Earth expansion model, but it is an issue in a plate tectonic framework. Especially during the CNS, I can't remember what that meant. Maybe we can go to their paper and type CNS, Cretaceous Normal Superchron. Not even sure what that is. No or few geomagnetic reversals occurred. That's really interesting. Because I was watching a video, this one, which I've seen before, but I was like, I gotta rewatch it. It's on, he's talking about Tamu Massif in Shatsky Rise, and mentioned that Shatsky Rise is the only oceanic plateau to have formed when magnetic reversals were occurring. Mind you, all of this map is caused by undercurrents. Undercurrents flowing out from here that then build up pressure and break the crust apart, and then they flow in to form the ocean floor. So the magnetic reversal aspect of it is really unrelated to what people think. I don't know what to make about it, but it's certainly not related to the actual North and South Pole at the time that the layers were being deposited. I suspect it's literally related to the direction of flow. Maybe once the secondary mantle puncture hole forms, this one forms, flow goes out in all directions, but then at some point this one forms, and it kind of allows for like a exchange between them, and they start like overwhelming one another and doing like back and forth, so it has more of like a appearance of magnetic reversals occurring, where it's not as we interpret it, though. Something of that nature that's just not related to the actual flipping of the poles of the Earth, which a lot of like alternative science points to pole, like the concept of, oh, the poles are gonna flip, and I'm not saying they're not, but this stuff is not related. These are not related to ancient pole flips that can be like documented and measured, and no, that's when a pole flip happened. That's not what that's doing. Because people are basing this off of only the ocean floor. No one really attempts to explain the structure under the continents. It's just kind of ignored. Like, no, people talking about this stuff don't have any explanation for how this formed. But what I'm saying explains how this formed and how this formed and how these oceanic plateaus formed and how pretty much everything on Earth formed. So, like, it's just more all-encompassing than something that only focuses on this and is like, here's an explanation for this. Okay, so let's keep going, though. Seafloor, especially during Cretaceous normal superchron, and seafloor, so lacking corresponding magnetic spreading anomalies, especially during the Cretaceous normal superchron, and seafloor fabric of the Farallon plate and the Phoenix plate due to subduction. So, like, we don't see these plates. We just like the magnetic anomalies that are just not there. We don't see these plates. Why? Because they subducted. So it kind of, the evidence was erased. The Earth erased the evidence by subduction. So it would have been there. It's just we didn't have it. We missed the opportunity because here we are in this moment in time, and when it was exposed, it was millions of years ago, and it's just gone. It went into the mantle. It's gone. So that's how we explain this: is there's missing data in our modern interpretations, but to explain away the missing data, we just say it's been erased. Or essentially the model can't explain what we see, so we say that the reason it can't explain it is because the data that would explain it has been erased. Which is not really science, honestly. I mean, I get why we do that, but it's also not really scientific. It's just kind of theoretical and entirely theoretical. There's no actual evidence to draw upon except circumstantial that we can possibly, going back to the scales, like maybe when we only put it on this scale, it looks like this is the answer. So yeah, the data is erased. It's gone, like, because this is what's happening, plate tectonics. But when we also take the same evidence, put it on both scales, like kind of like process it through a computer program, say, like a framework of plate tectonics, process it, put it on the scale. Evidence will then have certain amount of oomph and weight to it. And if we put that on the plate tectonic scale, and then we do the same, we take the same evidence, put it through an expanding Earth model, specifically what I'm saying, where the mantle was punctured in Pakistan, current flowed out under the crust in all directions, created the magnetic anomaly map of the Earth, and all these nuances to it, where the Earth then fractally supernovaed, all these nuances to it, then put the evidence through that model, and then weigh the two. It doesn't even compare. Like the scale tips to the side because it's just so imbalancedly towards Earth expansion. Okay, let's keep going. Then I said the region in question is precisely above the secondary mantle puncture hole caused in the Earth's expansion process, which we kind of just looked at. So this I've been saying is the secondary mantle puncture hole for probably a year now since I noticed it. I'm pretty sure it's in my Earth's expansion video or Earth's undercurrents video. I'm not completely certain if I talk about it. I might not mention this in the Earth's undercurrents video, but I've been talking about this for a long time. So this is a location of just, that's why I even looked at Ecuador, is because this is a location of high relevance in my interpretation. So I should probably look at Ecuador geology, and I did. And so that the region in question here. So here's the Pinon formation, as well as a basin underlaid by the Pinon formation. So it's kind of separated. It's got like a divot to it. And then another terrain, which we'll come across in more detail, the San Juan terrain. I'm not sure if the Gorgona terrain, if I have any other posts, I might have one about it. And then I just put, here's where the oceanic plateau fragment is. Here's where the secondary mantle puncture hole is. And pH miles per hour, baby. We speeding, revving the engine. That shit ain't in no neutral. Pfft, shoot. Okay. So let me just make sure I read this. Is precisely above the secondary mantle puncture hole, so it's right there. Mind you, there's a lot of nuance to this. There was a time when the secondary mantle puncture hole had the oceanic crust. So before I talk about that, we can talk about North America. There was a time when the Western Pacific oceanic crust was physically below North America, which I show, for instance, here. So this is the Western Pacific there, and it was physically below this crust of North America, generally to the literally past Florida, where the mid-Pacific mountains were here. These ones were up in this nook and down here. I don't know if this is exactly, it's kind of hard to map on the modern Earth with all of the nuance of like different radius, but it generally fits. So it was generally there. Notice Chicxulub is there, right there. Here's Chicxulub, and here's like this corner. So there's a current flowing this way from the mantle puncture hole that flowed below Europe into North America, filled this region with pressure, and created like a boundary that ended up being North America to a point where it flowed around this region of high pressure and flowed down this way and cut Africa and North America apart, but just kept flowing this way and then went out this way, as well as up this way, because another current came in opposite to it and went between it and segmented it, caused it to fan out in a V shape to form the Western Pacific, but it did so while the crust itself that was forming the Western Pacific was still below North America. In a similar way, let's close all these. This right here, this chunk by Fiji, was physically below South America at the secondary mantle puncture hole. And then I drew it like an angel because it kind of looks like an angel. Although this white maybe could be more over that way too. But then it has like a trident coming out above it. And a lot more detail up this way. So if we go back to this, we see that trident coming out above it that then separates and goes over that way and goes above it, goes over this way generally and goes up, especially visible here. Here, notice these go up to these circles where there's a upward current generally. This one looks kind of maybe not as clear as this one, going up to there, these two going up to there, this one holding the boundary of this structure. So under Ecuador, basically, at this location here of the secondary mantle puncture hole, there's this thing going up this way, which goes up through Baja, California, up this way, and then pushes material into North America, which is in my Earth's Undercurrents video, and just in passing, but it's very... See my Baja BC playlist for more on that. It shoves material over here, deposits it, especially Eye to Eye, and maybe some others. And is the video name Eye to Eye, one of my underground science videos. Deposited the material over here, but while it's doing that, it's also involved over here, but above, not below, above, doing stuff over here. So that is specifically starts at this location, is relatively related to what I was just saying, basically, about the trident shape coming out of that region. Whereas below, we'll talk about in a little bit. Going back to the other side of this structure. So if we just go back over here, there's this trident going up here, but there's like a flame-looking structure here going down that has like an extension that way, but like a flame structure below it. This is going down along the western margin of South America and basically separating it from Australia and Antarctica, which were adjacent at the time before the Earth expanded, segmenting them, and then drilling in along these locations. So we'll get back to that at some point, but... So there's that. Instead of this, like instead of it moving from being way out here at 83 and then getting closer at, I think it said 60 million a collision, something like that. Instead of that, where it's riding the Farallon plate and the Farallon plate just subducts into the abyss, instead of that, there's actually an expansion only, and it's all mapped and all the evidence is present, still to be seen, and doesn't have this missing evidence problem, really, where it's only can be theoretical because there's no evidence for it. It's kind of like... say, I don't want to say dark matter, but things in physics and cosmology that are purely theoretical, that can't be observed, also in quantum mechanics, like quarks. Things that are just not observed, but are in theory, but not observed. There's no evidence because it's hidden away because of whatever reason. In this instance, it's because of subduction. In quantum mechanics world, because of just its relative size, it's within the nucleus kind of thing, or in cosmology because of the distance and whatever excuse we really have when we have a theory that doesn't actually fit the data, and so we come up with reasons it doesn't fit the data rather than considering alternative theories, and instead just like maintain a theory just because we have been doing it. Once it gets established, it kind of just holds the position of the theory du jour that then just lingers for decades. Another paper, so then another paper in the area, this one. Created oceanic terrains in Ecuador, southern edge of the Caribbean plate, question mark, by Gélard et al. Gélard. Sorry. This paper corroborates that the oceanic plateaus of a region, quote, were not separated from the Andean margin by wide ocean basins. No magmatic arc is known on the Ecuadorian Colombian continental margin between the late Jurassic and late Eocene in 140 to 40 million years, according to these authors, including themselves in a previous paper. This suggests that no oceanic plate was subducting beneath the north-northeast trending margin of the northern Andes during the Cretaceous and Paleocene. This I found so strange. I was like, there's just no subduction in this time? Doesn't that, like, disprove plate tectonics? Like, aren't you, like, I feel like the papers about plate tectonics interpretations themselves basically disprove plate tectonics. Forgive my layman interpretation of things. Two consequences must be emphasized. First, this implies that the accretion of oceanic terrains was not preceded by subduction, and therefore that the oceanic terrains Pinon Formation were not separated from the Andean margin by wide oceanic basins. I mean, evidence shows that this thing that we're looking at here isn't the case, basically. This is not the case. This is plate tectonics. Part of me, guys, I don't want to, like, I even wrote it maybe a little aggressively. I don't want to attack anyone's work. I really appreciate everyone's work and that people are doing this and really, like, focusing on details. It's just in a plate tectonics framework, so this is what happens, is plates move it. But then other papers explicitly and expressly state that that is not what happened. The oceanic terrains were not separated from the Andean margin by wide oceanic basins. They must have been generally in the area, basically. And how does that happen? Because the Earth expanded, and Australia was generally in the area too, and then it moved away, leaving behind these oceanic terrains, and in the process forming these wide oceanic basins, but without a step of, like, them separating and then sending a chunk across. Like, it's not like they're separated and then a chunk moves across as this oceanic terrain of Pinon Formation. It's that they're together and then the chunk gets left behind. To get around this, they suggest the Caribbean Oceanic Plateau to be its means of accretion. So basically, they're like, well, something's going on here. Like, where's this oceanic terrain coming from? It can't have came from Manihiki across. It can't have crossed this wide oceanic basin. That's not what happened. So what they interpret is, therefore, it must have come from the Caribbean large igneous province here and be part of it, but we'll see in a second that that can't be the case either. And that it is actually more like the Ontong Java Plateau, Ontong Java Nui complex in terms of its geochemistry, which points to that it was once part of it and wasn't really part of the Caribbean large igneous province. Perhaps mixed with in part, but not like so much so that papers are just purely accepting that it was part of the Caribbean large igneous province. So this paper by Jaylard et al. Further state, let's just go here. Here's the region. Here's the Pinon Formation region. with the Manabi Basin between, and the Pinon Formation, I guess, is just the white in general. The region is further described as comprising the San, so I just kind of mentioned these other ones. San Juan terrain, which is dated to 105 million. The Garanda terrain of late Cretaceous pre-Campanian age, less before or older than 83.6 million radiometric dating, with the Pinon terrain described as early Cretaceous having elements in the west. So early Cretaceous, I guess like 140, let's say, having elements in the west of 89.8 to 72.1. I think they just said something like similar to late Cretaceous pre-Campanian, and these are the dates that I found for those periods that they wrote more explicitly, which maybe is actually here. So here's the San Juan terrain. Easternmost oceanic unit, so before the Pinon terrain, is the San Juan terrain, the easternmost one, like the first accreted one, which crops out along a narrow belt in the western part of the Interandean Valley. So places it can be seen like at the surface, basically, and yield a isochron of 123 plus or minus 13 million radiometric dating, and a poor argon integrated age of 105 million radiometric dating. It's interesting. It says poor argon. We'll come to something that kind of mentions some oddities in this area, which from a secondary mantle puncture hole interpretation kind of makes sense. But we'll get to that. Garanda terrain, late Cretaceous pre-Campanian, not directly dated. Although not directly dated, is overlain by pelagic shirts bearing Santonian to Maastrichtian radiolarians, less supporting a late Cretaceous pre-Campanian age, so sometime in the late Cretaceous before 83.6 radiometric dating. And then the Pinon terrain, I've underlined here, the Pinon basements was classically ascribed to the early Cretaceous. It has been recently dated west of this location, where interpillow sediments yielded this period Coniacian through Campanian, radiolarians, and foraminifers, which is why I put 89.8 to the 82 or 72.1 this period. Okay, that's all that one. Importantly, they further point out that the northern Andes so if we go to the Andes, northern Andes, central Andes, southern Andes, I'm not exactly sure where the exact boundaries are, but the northern Andes start generally here. These are the northern Andes, above the secondary mantle puncture hole, basically. The northern Andes differ from the central Andes in their construction by the lack of manifestations of oceanic subduction between the latest Jurassic and Eocene times. So again here, 140 to 40, and by the presence of magmatic material of oceanic origin in their western part. So the northern Andes have magmatic material of oceanic origin in their western part, i.e. these oceanic plateaus. And a lack of manifestations of oceanic subduction between the latest Jurassic and Eocene times. So a lack of in the northern Andes between this time. But in the central Andes, not a lack of. So if we go back to that, there is here at the secondary mantle puncture hole, and at here, which is at the secondary mantle puncture hole, there's a current flow that's flowing like a flame down this way. That would be essentially causing an undercurrent subducting below the central Andes over here, down in this region. Probably especially in this region, I would guess. I haven't looked into it exactly, but my initial guess is in this region particularly is a more pronounced subduction. And then I say this further corroborates, this is from my Earth's Undercurrents video, where I just took the picture. This flame corroborates the interpretation of current flows around Fiji that were positioned at the secondary mantle puncture hole, SMPH, where they emitted a flame-like jet southeastward into South America from below the secondary mantle puncture hole, as described in part in Earth's Undercurrents. So this here, which I then just redrew, and unfortunately in a bad color, it's not too visible, but you can see it probably. Flame-like current, flame-like current pressure points, so I circled all these points, probably there too, where it just kind of like drilled in underneath the crust and created pressure points of these divots of low magnetic intensity, where high magnetic intensity is regions of like mounds. Blue is regions where current flows. So these are like regions that had the mound material extracted from it because there's this flame-like current flowing into it and just removing these little spaces, almost like rungs on a ladder, when you like have a long ladder that you lift up and set it on different rungs. Like it's literally extending like a ladder as the earth expands at different rungs, chink chink chink, and attaching the flame is like pressure pointing, applying pressure there, and then probably getting caught there mostly, which is actually, if we look down this way, it's kind of like opposite to the secondary mantle puncture hole, just like straight down. And then maybe I would say below there's less subduction visible, is my guess. I haven't looked to see, but like that's what I do. So maybe sooner or later I'll get into looking into that region and this region. But I am already back to oceanic plateaus. But anyway, I don't have to do it alone. Another map of the region depicted by Vallejo et al. Vallejo? Vallejo. Sorry, pardon me, sir. But from this paper, which let's just go ahead and click it. I already have it downloaded, but from this paper, mode and timing of terrain accretion in the forearc of the Andes in Ecuador. So here's a picture from there, and then I continue like reading it. Describe the Palatanga Formation as having enriched. So this is another oceanic plateau in the region, which if we go back here, Palatanga. Not sure if it's on this image. Not sure. There it is. Palatanga block is these really close dots. This one here, right there, And then the Pignon block is side at an angle, which we can see it up here, or no, here. So notice the Palatanga is inland further than the Pignon block. Okay. So the Palatanga, oops, where is it? Here we go. Further describe the Palatanga, or Payatanga maybe, formation as having enriched mid-ocean ridge basalts, MORB, enriched E. MORB is like a standard term, I guess, meaning mid-ocean ridge basalts, meaning basalts that are coming from mid-ocean ridges. So like these basalts, like here's the mid-ocean ridge in the Atlantic. All these are pretty much the same. Over here, they're not so mid-ocean, but besides the point, it's not very visible on this map for some reason, but we can see it here. Mid-ocean ridge here. Where they're coming from, and these tend to be a certain geochemistry, so they're called MORBs, and sometimes I guess they're called enriched MORBs. So there's enriched MORBs and oceanic plateau geochemical affinities. And then I go on to say, suggesting that it erupted from a suggesting that it erupted from a mantle plume. Let me just read theirs over here that I underline now instead of reading this directly. The Palatanga block is exposed along the eastern border of the Western Cordillera, and it is separated from the continental margin by a suture zone, this one, that represents part of the late Cretaceous ocean-continent suture. Late Cretaceous, where there's like a accretion of terrain in the late Cretaceous and leaving a suture zone, like a region of two separate materials being sutured together, that then is called a suture zone. Basement basalts and gabbros of the Palatanga block yield enriched mid-ocean ridge basalt and oceanic plateau geochemistries, suggesting that the Palatanga Formation erupted from a mantle plume. Which I go on to say, like the secondary mantle puncture hole. Like it literally, this Palatanga one, I was like, I think this Palatanga one literally is sourced from here and came upwelled and then went this way, leaving behind this layer that we then see as the Palatanga Formation here, or block, whatever various names it's called. Then I go on to say, furthermore, it has also been suggested that the rocks of the Palatanga Formation are genetically related to the Caribbean Columbia Oceanic Plateau, the Caribbean Large Igneous Province I've been mentioning. Another name for it, I'm not sure the most used name. I think Caribbean Large Igneous Province, but I'm not completely sure. But the geochemistry of this suggests that it's genetically related to the Caribbean Columbia Oceanic Plateau. So that would suggest that this region is composed of also secondary mantle puncture hole emissions that flowed out here and then went up this way went between the continents and went through this way and created the Caribbean Large Igneous Province. We just kind of Caribbean Large Igneous Province. Yeah, a clip. So like there. For instance, a created clip here, so kind of like the Palatanga. So notice, again, notice where it is. Also the time frame through 69, like approaching 65, 66, which is when the Earth rapidly expanded. The mean age of the oceanic crust, if we look at mean age, oceanic crust is 64.2, slightly younger than the KT boundary when the Earth rapidly began to expand. So like more of the crust formed, oceanic crust formed after rapid expansion of the Earth began when the continents broke apart at the KT boundary. So I see this one as pointing to that the Palatanga Formation is in the Caribbean are from the secondary mantle puncture hole. So they're like immediately upwelling. So if you think about it, there's an upwelling from the mantle here. There's another upwelling at the primary mantle puncture hole over here that flows this way. So it's under the crust for a large distance. It flows this way. It flows through here, flows over here. Then it forms oceanic plateaus, Ontong Java Plateau, Manihiki Plateau, Hikarangi Plateau, Pinon Formation, etc. And so it's not going to have the same geochemistry as a fresh emission from the mantle here that just flowed over this way. So this is going to be enriched, where the other ones are going to be the opposite of enriched, depleted. So if we go to, that's Vallejo. Sorry, I'm doing my best. If we don't go to Kerr et al., this paper describe that the Pinon and Palatanga formations, let's just read it, Pinon Formation, given their similarity to other oceanic plateau lavas, is highly likely that the lava's intrusions of the Pinon Formation also originated in an oceanic plateau. However, as we will discuss below, the Pinon Formation cannot belong to the same oceanic plateau as the Palatanga unit, as these two units are of the same age and accreted at different times. Furthermore, the Palatanga and Pinon units are separated by the Naranjal and Makuuchi Island arcs. A chemical difference between the two units is also evident. This is where it's really like irrefutably different. In that the Pinon unit has slightly more depleted light rare earth element patterns, which would suggest either that it was derived from a more depleted source region, like a current flow that flowed in all this whole length and became depleted in large or in low rare earth elements, flowed over here, became relatively depleted compared to this one, to a point where its geochemical signature is different, or that it represents the product of a more extensive mantle melting event. Same thing, more extensive, like a primary mantle puncture hole that flows out in all directions, and fills the whole globe, and in so doing, it becomes depleted. Where the secondary mantle puncture hole is more just to like bring balance to the kind of like drinking out of a bottle that has a hole, like a coffee, like a Starbucks cup. There they have that little second hole, or just a coffee plastic lid. You drink out of one side. If that hole is blocked, then the cup will squeeze, so it's not like balanced. So it literally punctures a second hole. Like if you imagine you drink out of that cup and block that hole, this cup will squeeze to a point where the lid opens off of it because it no longer has the same shape. The lid opens and lets a second flow in, a second exchange in, so that the cup can re-stabilize. Same thing going on here with the secondary mantle puncture hole, where the earth was punctured again to bring a balance. And we even see it in the Palatanga and Pignon unit geochemistry. Let's keep going. What did I say? Okay, I already said that, so let's keep going. Palatanga unit has thus far proved too altered to date by argon-argon step heating method. So remember, poorly dated argon-argon somewhere? This I found really interesting. The Palatanga formation is further described as being too altered to date by typical methods and requires inferences from a sequence of mudstones in the region, sequence of red mudstones, blah, 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 yielded these dates, since although on the basis of field evidence and preliminary geochemistry, these pillow basalts were included within the Palatanga unit, the geochemical data presented in this paper reveal that these samples do in fact possess a subduction-related signature. It is therefore unlikely that these pillow basalts belong to the Palatanga unit. So they're basically using some other adjacent atop sequentially atop features to get a date for this. Like, because this is dated to this date, we don't know when that is because it has a too altered, its dating is too altered. So if we keep reading from this, the Palatanga accretion, which mind you is again related to the secondary mantle puncture hole, the timing of accretion of the Palatanga block is critical to tectonic evolution models, assuming plate tectonics, of the region, but regardless critical. Although there is a little direct evidence for the age of the accretion of the Palatanga block to the Andean continental margin, there are several pieces of information that do provide important constraints on the timing of this event. First, as noted by Aspden et al. In 1992, a widespread resetting of isotopic ages in the Cordillera Real between 85 and 65 million radiometric dating, i.e. the KT boundary. So leading up to the KT boundary and up until the KT boundary. Like, basically imagine the Earth has undercurrents below the crust and all the continents are together, but pressure is building up. And pressure's building up, and pressure's building up, and 65 million is approaching, pressure's building up, and then it's getting so overpressured that it's like highly pressurized at 85 million to a point where strange things start to happen and up until the continents break apart, and then that pressure can be released by the Earth expanding to a new radius. So 85 to 65, literally a widespread reset of isotopic ages. I don't know if I've ever seen that anywhere else. I'm sure it's happened elsewhere, and I'd almost need to look into where that's happened elsewhere to kind of get an idea. But the fact that I came across this concept the first time ever while looking into the secondary mantle puncture hole, and did some like Palatanga block after realizing, so this is like the sequence that I'm looking at them. I'm just looking at papers, finding something, underlining it, making a post, posting it, and then looking at papers, and then finding something, and then making a post, and just keep doing that, and anything of interest, make a post. And then I slowly come to this realization that the Palatanga block is a direct emission from the secondary mantle puncture hole, as is the Caribbean Large Igneous Province. At which point I come to realize the Palatanga block and this region, a widespread region, a resetting of isotopic ages. The absence of regional igneous activity at this time led to the interpretation, so they're just trying to explain it, that this resetting was most probably caused by the uplift of the Cordillera Real, which uplift. Like, imagine a secondary mantle puncture hole is punctured and then it starts to upwell, leading to uplift. So that kind of fit within to a point where I just underlined it. And then the second, they provide some other alternatives as a result of this uplift. Some other deposits. Third, other things, but I didn't underline it because I felt it wasn't directly related to what we're looking at. Taken together, these three lines of evidence suggest that the accretion of the Palatanga unit may well have been a protracted event that commenced 86 to 85 million, but was not finally completed until the end of the Maastrichtian time, 65 million, the KT boundary. Thus, the Palatanga accretion event may have been diachronous along the length of the Cordillera. Whatever that means. Diachronous. Occurring in different geological periods. Okay. Across different times across the length. Different times across the length. Okay, so we made it through all of my Ecuador research that I came across yesterday. And I'm gonna stop for the night, and I'll be back tomorrow for sure to talk about Shatsky Rise, because I found some really interesting stuff. I'm excited. There's a large igneous province rabbit hole I've been going down. I know they seem kind of boring. There's this is kind of interesting, these shape in here, but let's say this one, the Ontong Java Plateau. It's kind of boring looking at it. It's not that interesting if you don't make connections with other things. But with these connections, they come to life. They really come to life as so interesting. It's incredible. It really is. Not that interesting, so interesting. Okay, guys, I'm going to get out of here. See you next time. Thanks for hanging out. Always a pleasure. And happy Thanksgiving or something. And it was yesterday here if you live in the United States. I know it's the world, internet of the world, but I'm thankful for literally everything. Family, friends. I feel like you guys are all my family and friends, just forgotten bonds and things across time, and we just gotta remember the truth of the matter. Or I got to, and you guys are just kind of trolling me. I don't know. That's what friends are for. Alright, peace.